Hi everybody, it is my pleasure, delight and honour to be here with William Micklem. We are at his home here at Powerscourt Gardens in County Wicklow. William is the consummate horseman. He has sourced numerous Olympic horses, including Biko, Custom Made, Gilt Edge, Mandiba and High Kingdom. In fact, William bred Mandiba and High Kingdom. He's the inventor of the Micklem multi-bridle. He's also the author of the world's best-selling equestrian manual, the Complete Horse Riding Manual. To date, it has sold 250,000 copies, has actually been translated into 11 languages, most recently Chinese, for those of you who speak Chinese. He is a fellow of the British Horse Society. He is an Equestrian Federation of Ireland tutor. He is the creator of Habitual Hats, the acclaimed tool for improving performance in sport and business. There are many other accolades. He has too many accolades to mention in one session. He has been recognized by many of the world's top equestrian professionals, including Denny Emerson. To quote Denny Emerson, quote, "William has made huge contributions to the manner in which we ride, train, equip and breed and think about horses. His positive impact spans oceans, disciplines and breeds of horses. If William speaks or writes about it, go listen or read it." Karen O'Connor, who needs no introduction, quotes, "William's teaching philosophies are ahead of their time and his horsemanship continues to be the flagship of our training program. He has shaped my career as he has so many others." And in conclusion, Jimmy Wofford quotes, "William is one of the best minds in the horse world. He has a unique mixture of practical experience at the highest levels and thorough knowledge of classical principles of horsemanship. Anything William says is worth hearing." And now we are privileged to get to hear William.
Now I'm feeling very embarrassed, but there we are. I'm so pleased to be with you and so pleased in particular to be with Hilda. And I suppose the really important thing I should make from the beginning is that all of those things that Hilda talked about, I take it as a great compliment. But the most important thing of all is the attitude of mind. And if I go to my book at the start, I'm not sure whether you can see this, but this is the Complete Horse Riding Manual. And the wonderful thing about that, at the very start, in the page of contents, we have a little picture of one Hilda with one of her students. And Hilda is a great coach. Why is she a great coach? Because she has the right attitude of mind. If I go on 2 pages further, maybe 3, there's the beginning of Karen O'Connor's introduction, riding the great Biko, who I bought as a 3-year-old and sold to her as a 6-year-old. Biko could have been a top show jumper as well as a top event horse. And there we are in the introduction. We have the most glorious picture, one of my favorite pictures of my life, which I hope you can see that. And if you have the book, you can open it up yourself. In the introduction by Karen O'Connor, we have Hilda riding a grey horse. Her balance is perfect. The softness is there. But what it speaks to me most of all is Hilda is saying, "I love what I'm doing." And as a result, the horses, of course, love what they're doing. And if we wanted to finish this interview now, we could, and just leave it with the word love, because love is so important. You know, when I I'm going to make Hilda's ears blush now, because when I think of Hilda, I think of her as one of the most best role models for other students of mine, because she's so motivated. And we look at motivation and we say, what makes a person motivated? Well, aims and dreams, but that's very easy. We can have, particularly at Christmas time, we can have the most wonderful dreams, and we can have aims to go to the Olympics and do all sorts of things. But we have to go below that for real motivation, and self-belief is something that I think, particularly in America, you are good at developing self-belief. And then there's another thing which goes alongside that, which is what Hilda is good at, which we forget. And it's questions that drive us. Questions about how things are done, how things might be done. Questions about learning more in depth and more in breadth. The breadth word is very important. A breadth of knowledge is so important to be a good horse person. But underneath that, you have even two more powerful drives for motivation. And one is necessity. And there's a phrase I often use, that things turn out the best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out. And you couldn't get a better example of that than Hilda. Whether it's a horse going lame, whether it's a personal tragedy, or whether it's a storm coming in which prevents her going somewhere, she will always turn a negative into a positive and always make the best of the situation. But that still isn't the biggest driver. The biggest driver is love, which I began this little piece with. And whether it's a love of horses, a love of people, a love of teaching, a love of living, Hilda has it. And for all of those of you who are listening and want to improve their performance and get more out of each individual day and then each individual week and month and year, love is such a key word. And of course, I'm so lucky because the main reason why the Micklem Bridle has been such a huge success is that it's loved by horses. It's more comfortable, it's more humane. So love is a really key word. So as I said, Hilda, we could stop now. We could finish on that, because that is the most important thing. Whether you are flying aircraft or you are riding horses, that connection goes all the way through. So are you embarrassed?
I am embarrassed. I hope I'm camouflaging it well. I'm very honoured. Thank you for those words. And I certainly love what I do, and I'm glad that that is transparent. I do give it my best.
And if I can give one example, the first time I met Hilda actually was on horseback, and she was riding a horse of a lady in Ireland called Joan Keogh, who used to run Dressage Ireland, and has a son, Aidan Keogh, who I've taught for many years, who's an international event rider. But she was riding this big 17-hand horse who was called Solly. That was his stable name. His competition name I always found difficulty with, because it was Spruce Guy or Spruce Fella or Spruce something. But anyway, Solly was not the most talented in the world, but by having the right approach to him and building his confidence, building his trust, it was amazing what a horse he was for me to then continue to work on, because he said, okay, William, what do you want me to do? And although he was fairly limited physically in many ways, he became a Prix Saint George dressage horse and went over to England and was second against all of the British top people in Prix Saint George. But the basis of that is starting your young horses off in a way where you don't bully them, but you have the right relationship with them. They mustn't bully you equally. So it's a parent-child relationship in many ways. And if you do get that relationship with your horse, that's a mental relationship, that you allow them to come alongside you, and you don't try and make them submit. I hate the word submission, but when they accept what you're doing, what we should be striving for all the time is acceptance. At the bottom of the dressage test in the collective marks, it always had the word submission, and I always hated it. Now I would say that the majority of people are talking about acceptance as opposed to submission. But a horse that is submissive is not a horse, is a cowed individual that you don't get the best out of. But a horse that is accepting and working with their rider, then you have partnership. And people say, well, this is very romantic. But you know, it's not romantic. And that's the wonderful thing about horse sports is the vast majority of people riding horses are doing it for their pleasure, and they're doing it at a low level. That's a fact. And if people develop a relationship with the horse at their lower level, whether it's a pony, whether it's a cob, whether it's a retired horse, develop a relationship, then horse riding becomes life enhancing. And I believe that the connection with horses is life enhancing, and it makes horse riding extra special. I'm involved with an organisation called Festina Lente in Ireland, which has now been running for 33 years, where we offer help and support and education for people with huge challenges in life, some physical, some mental, all ages. We have 33 horses and ponies. We employ 35 staff now, and we see 300 patients or riders each week. And every day you see that horses are life enhancing, but you have to let yourself go to that level where you think that you can have a better relationship with the horse. Again, not romantic, they are not human beings, but they can be very close to you and you can be very close to them.
Very interesting, William, that you bring up the point of submission, because less than 14 hours ago I was doing a Ride IQ session with the girls and for the members, and I actually brought up this idea of my dislike of the word submission and how it used to be at the end of the dressage tests, and there was a mark for submission and other things, and how I welcomed the new USEA tests, which just came out this month, and they'll be good for the next 4 years. And instead of submission, the collective mark statement is something like harmony. In fact, it is harmony of horse and rider. And then we spoke a little bit about Peter Gray, one of our Ride IQ coaches, when he judges, and he literally just got notification that he's going to judge at the 2024 World Games.
Terrific.
Which is fantastic. That what he likes to see when he's judging, be it harmony, submission, whatever you want to call it, but he wants to see a happy horse, a horse working happily. So interesting you brought up your distaste for the word submission.
It's actually in the FEI rules that what they should be looking for is happy athletes. And the FEI have adopted this strap line, which is 2 hearts in harmony. Now, for some people, they would think again that that's too airy-fairy, but I totally get what they're thinking of. And unless we make sure we work with our animals in harmony, then we won't have any horse sports in the future. I
agree. Interesting concepts and important concepts, particularly as we train and as we trot and canter down centre line, to be mindful of this.
So as regards harmony and being humane to the horse, I have George here at my skull, and I'm just going to take the top jaw off and turn it upside down. And we might have to do a bit of manoeuvring to know what you can see. But you can see the top jaw that I've taken off, which I'm now moving up and down, is so much wider than the bottom jaw. And that's where I came in with the Micklem bridle, that the top jaw here, which I'm currently moving, is so much wider with the teeth than the bottom jaw. And this means if I put George back together again, that there's an overhang either side, that the top jaw is on this particular horse here, who's actually an American horse, God rest his soul. It's about 2 to 3 centimeters wider than the lower jaw. And then we put a tight strap, particularly those who use crank nosebands, tight straps around the outside, so you can see how the horse, the tissue on the inside between the protruding edge of the upper jaw molar teeth and the noseband on the outside causes pressure and irritation and cuts and even ulcers inside the horse's mouth. So I'm always feeling inside the horse's mouth to see what happens there. Now people say, well, I rasp my teeth, that sorts that out. But we must remember that a horse's tooth is like a pencil. So you can see that much when the horse is a young horse, but gradually this wears out and it pushes through from the bottom. And when the horse is, with a horse about 25 and with ponies probably closer to 35, they literally run out of teeth. And if you excessively rasp the teeth, that in itself is cruelty. The other thing in this area that happens is you put a crank noseband and it goes over this hole here. And there's one of these either side. I hope that you can see this. I think you can. I've just got a little mark around it. There's a hole there, and there's a hole exactly the same place the other side. And this is the exit canal, the infraorbital exit canal for the infraorbital nerves. And what happens is that you get crank nosebands with very little tissue there, crank nosebands with press on those nerves. And as you know yourselves, when you, for instance, cross your legs for a long period of time, you get numbness. If you put pressure on a nerve for any length of time, you get numbness. What are these infraorbital nerves? What is their purpose? They service all this area of the horse's face, all down here. Therefore, you're actually numbing the area where you want sensitivity, where you have the bit. So crank nosebands, they might keep the jaws shut, and some people might see that as an advantage. I see it as a cover-up for bad training. But what it also does is actually numb the area where you have the bit. So that's where I came in. And then I was always aware about the trigeminal nerve at the top of the horse, and the nuchal crest here, the ligament, the nuchal crest is where it's attached here, goes all the way down through the horse's spine. And of course, inside here is the horse's brain, and the horse's brain where every single nerve comes from. And what do? But we make uncomfortable bridles in terms of the top of the head, which is why I don't use a separate noseband. But in particular, they put pressure on the ears. And I think people are unaware of the glossopharyngeal nerve and the other nerves, trigeminal I've mentioned, which go close to the ears. And if they go close to the ears, then the horse gets irritated. And some people say, well, I'll have a very big strap that goes down behind the ears. They do indeed, but what happens is because there's a natural channel for a strap to go, then those modern headpieces are actually going further forward and forcing the ears even more forward. Can you believe there's even a particular bridle which has little metal inserts which holds the horse's ears forward so that the horse looks beautiful? But those sort of things are just absolutely, not in my radar and unacceptable. And there are certain things in with horses which are unacceptable, and that's one of them. So my bridle copes with the nerves or makes it more comfortable for the horse at the top of the head. And then I'd like you to draw your attention to two more areas. First of all, the nose bones. And I'm just going to tip the horse's head up so you can see, I think, how fragile, how small those are, how narrow those are at the end of the nose. And what happens is, instead of having a cavesson noseband that's cranked up, some people have a drop noseband. They're more and more fashionable again. But they put the drop noseband down here. And in my opinion, low drop nosebands should be banned. When I started on this journey and went to the Dublin Veterinary School, I looked at the skulls, and of the skulls there were about 8. 3 of them had green stick fractures in these bones here. So the Micklem bridle sits there. So it's very solid, but not so high that it comes over those holes. And again, I show you 2 pictures. First of all, you can see these are all the nerves of the horse's head. And this is where the infraorbital nerve comes out of. So you can see those big pile of nerves all going down to the lower face. And then you can see this mass of nerves around the top of the horse's head and the ears. So I just have the main ones done for you here. And then if I put the Micklem bridle over, you can see how we avoid all the main areas of difficulty. There is no pressure on the horse's molar teeth whatsoever, and we avoid the exit point of the infraorbital nerve, and generally speaking, we find a comfortable position at the top of the head and neck. And there's one more area which is so important. So I have to separate the head again. So I had the lower jaw here, and it's not easy to see, but Hilda can see that these are the bars of the mouth here. And the bars of the mouth are like a knife. They're that sharp. They really are.
Yes.
But they're also fairly close together, and this is totally standard from one side to the other. It is very rare to get a tongue that narrow. You can occasionally, but very rare. So the tongue sits over the bars of the mouth, wider than the bars of the mouth. And then on top of the tongue, we put the bit. So most people are aware of what the tongue is doing. Some people inspect the mouth and look on the inside of the mouth, but very few people inspect the bottom of the tongue, underneath the tongue. And it's the pressure of the bit on the tongue, which then goes on the bars of the mouth, which makes horses raise their tongue, which is why the three-ring snaffle is the most popular bit in the world, because it lifts the bit up as opposed to pulling it back. But most people are unaware of the pressure here. And of course it happens with young horses. They get into the habit of lifting their tongue, and then they put the tongue over the bit. And of course when they put their tongue over the bit goes directly onto these two very narrow pieces of bone, which only have a very shallow amount of tissue going over them. And that in itself is more comfortable, but they don't put two and two together and put the tongue back. So horses that are putting their tongue over the bit is a major problem. And it comes when there's too much pressure on the rein. It comes from people getting left behind. You know, I'm a great fan of Western riding with a lighter rein. I'm a great fan of any sort of riding with a lighter rein. Certainly what we need to do is to let our hands go with the movement of the horse's head and neck, so you don't have big pressure there. But in English riding, as opposed to Western riding, it's a huge problem, is discomfort in the mouth caused by pressure on the tongue. So I'm also very pleased to say that from the beginning I wanted a bridle that would also go bitless. So I have the competition bridle which doesn't go bitless, but I have the multi-bridle which does go bitless. And it also has a ring on the front of the nose here. And without question, it's the most comfortable lunge cavesson in the world. Lunge cavessons are a two-edged sword. Most of them are very uncomfortable. They might allow us to attach a rope securely or a lunge rein securely, but they're very uncomfortable. So most people attach the lunge rein or lunge rope direct to the bit. Now, attaching it to the bit is a no-no. I won't have that. But with my bridle, you don't have to change anything. You don't have to put anything underneath. You just attach the rein with the multi-bridle. You attach the lunge rein to the ring at the front of the nose. Bob's your ankle, away you go. So when I go to a competition with a young horse, I will often lunge it, and then all you have to do is take the rope off and go in the dressage arena. The multi-bridle is fully approved by the FEI. So I probably will never come up with any better idea than that. And it was an idea that started when I was about 10, when I first heard a lecture about the teeth. And it's the sort of thing that it was always impressed me about Hilda. She picks up bits and pieces of information. She keeps her ears open. And I'm delighted to say we now have a girth designed with the same principles. In other words, designed from the inside out. The bridle is designed from the inside out of the horse's skull. But if you go and look at your horses this afternoon, go and have a look at where the girth goes, and you'll find it's not totally, as it were, symmetrical in terms of the width of the rib cage at the front and the back. The horse's shape underneath your leg is like a cone, which is narrower at the base and then comes wider. It's narrower at the front of the girth and wider at the back of the girth, which is why most girths have an uneven pull on the horse's sides, or they stretch the straps on your saddle, because when you get up on the horse, you pull the girth, you have it on the same hole, and what do you find? You find that the front strap, the front buckled strap, appears to be looser than the back. So you do the front one up another hole, which then makes that tight, and you'll find that strap stretches, and then you may get the reverse over a period of time. But the bottom line is you don't get an equal pressure. So the Micklem girth is designed around that shape. So when you see it hanging up in the shop, you'll see it actually has a curve on it. So rather like Not that I'm a dress designer, but if you if you cut a dress for somebody who's got a narrow waist and bigger hips, you'll end up with the waist going absolutely level around the top. But you open that up, you cut that material, and it's all on a curve. Or you take the outside part of a yogurt pot, a pot which is shaped like that. I should have one here, but I don't. Shaped like that. If you take the casing off, the white paper, the paper that goes around the outside of that, and hold it up, you'll find it's got a curve. So that's why the Micklem girth has got a curve. And I'm so pleased. And the fellows of the British Horse Society recently did a education day. You'd be glad to hear fellows still do that, with Tim and Janelle Price, the legendary event riders. And he demonstrated getting up on a 3-year-old bareback, which would horrify some people. But in fact, the majority of young horses are backed without a saddle. Because, in my opinion, there is no doubt that a horse learns to buck against the girth rather than anything else. And yes, if a horse learns to buck a rider off, they might keep trying to do that. But generally speaking, with young horses, you get very few problems if you can back them without a girth. Or another way of looking at it, you need to take particular time and care about introducing your horse to a girth before doing any more.
Very interesting that you mention about the girth, because as some of you know, I've dabbled a little bit in endurance riding and had the pleasure of doing 100-mile FEI rides in Dubai, America, Canada. And some people that I ride for, some top people, in fact, particularly Heather and Jeremy Reynolds, they would be considered the top endurance riders, certainly in America and quite possibly in the world. Whenever I'm competing their horses, all my life I've been, trained to make sure your girth is tight, right? It's sort of rider responsibility, like making sure your helmet fits. And they would have me ride their horses with an extremely loose girth. I mean, you could fit at least a hand, probably 2 of my hands, because my hands are little. And it was very uncomfortable for me, but because, it wasn't uncomfortable in terms of it didn't give me confidence, particularly when you are traversing steep hills, very steep hills, going down into the canyons of the Sierra Nevada mountains. But their point being that the girth is quite uncomfortable for a horse. So exactly in keeping with what you're saying, because these horses would come in after maybe 20 miles, and if the girth was even just averagely snug, the horses would be quite sore, just from the, I suppose, ill-fitting girth. So interesting, that's all making sense now to me.
I'm full of admiration for you both doing the long distance riding and also going along these narrow mounting tracks with great heights. Being afraid of heights myself, it's just amazing.
That part of Tevis is pretty eerie, where you literally are on a single track, and I mean a single track. And you might look at endurance riders and have lack of respect for their equitation. But trust me, these endurance riders understand the meaning of riding a horse straight, because when you're going along a single track like that with a complete drop off on one side and a mountain on the other side, and as you're trotting along at a fairly good clip and you can hear the pebbles and rocks sort of going down the mountain behind you, it's definitely motivation to stay in balance and keep your horse straight.
Well, but the wonderful thing about horse riding is that you have to allow the horse to work for you, and I think most of us don't realize how much work the horse can do for us in every aspect. The horse is doing the jumping, not us. Too many people override in a dressage test. Too many people definitely override going across country, and therefore it's not as safe. And just thinking about your long distance ride and the cliffside and all that. My brother David went to New Zealand. He'd been ill for several years, a diabetic with considerable challenges. And I think he was 16, and he went on this long ride with a whole group of men in New Zealand on the farm, herding cattle. And for whatever reason, he got separated and wasn't from the rest of the men, and he wasn't feeling very well because of his diabetes. And he began to lose consciousness, and then he became unconscious on the horse's back. But what happened was that horse, with him on his back, not doing any steering whatsoever, traversed a small mountain range, but with the type of pass that you're talking about, very narrow with big drops, and took him all the way home through the night in the darkness, and, if you like, saved his life.
That's quite a story.
But the to illustrate the fact that the horses can work for you, and you probably will remember, Hilda, that I've often said, number one, get the right direction, number two, get the right speed in terms of competition riding. You know, you've got your horse in gear, you've warmed up, you've done your preparation, you're about to ride around Badminton horse trials or Kentucky horse trials. You're about to go around the cross country. What are the priorities? The horse is already in gear. From then on, it's get the right direction and the right speed. And you keep it simple. And I was delighted to hear Spencer Wilton, who features in my book, one of the Britain's Grand Prix riders, saying the other day, it was a quote in the Horse and Hound, which is a big magazine we have in England. There was a quote saying, when he's going in to ride his Grand Prix test, he's done his preparation, all he thinks about are the right direction and the right speed. And then we've just had the London International Horse Show, and you've had some magnificent jump-offs against the clock. Everything happens so quickly. It is absolutely a no-brainer to understand that a show jumping rider, when they're doing a jump off round against the clock, all they're thinking about all the time is the right direction and the right speed. Everything else just happens. But if you overcomplicate the situation and if you start taking away the horse's ability to think, then it becomes dangerous.
Wasn't it great watching the 66-year-old John Whittaker jumping that clean round at the London International?
So I often say it that equestrian sports are a sport for all, male, female, those with challenges, those with lesser challenges, but also a sport for life. And connected with that is that we have to look at horse ownership for life. And I do think it's a problem with our industry. They talk about it in the racing a lot, about how to rehome horses off the racetrack. But in fact, it's in all sport horses, and we must understand what an older horse can do. And I hate to see an older horse just standing in the field doing nothing and getting bored out of its mind and gradually seizing up. You know, even a very old horse, in my opinion, are much better doing something, albeit a lower grade, with less exertion of work, going slowly. But we always need older horses to introduce riders to riding. And if the older horse needs a little painkiller, it needs a little special care, then that's good, because it will allow them to have an active life with socialization not only with other horses, but with human beings.
Interesting, you also mentioned that. Back in Florida, I am very fortunate to have the use of, she's now going to be 27,
Great.
January 1st, quarter horse mare.
Great.
I used to compete her, and she just brings such joy to some of my older ladies,
Right.
and my young 6 and 7 year olds. And you would use the term, particularly with the children, teaching is that balance of seeing their effort and delight.
Yeah.
And this mare is worth her weight in gold, and she actually looks forward to doing her little, what I call walk trot lessons. And they need a job, and it's better for their body, a little bit like us. If we sit around and eat bonbons and donuts and don't exercise, we're going to seize up.
I have 3 main balances which I talk about all the time, and I'm aware of as I teach, and effort and delight is the foundation stone of that. So I feel a little warm glow now as you picked up on that from me, obviously years ago. And the other balance I often talk about is confidence and competence. I mean, there are a lot of people, and golfers are a good illustration, who are very competent, but then for whatever reason they lose that confidence, and then it all becomes useless. So from the start, we need to work in such a way, the whole way through, there's this balance between competence and confidence. And there are many reasons why somebody might lose confidence, but we have to ensure that we have both. You will never have confidence if you have no competence. but your competence will be useless if you don't have confidence. And that's where it's so important to surround yourself with people who are positive, who tell you what to do as opposed to not what they shouldn't do. It applies to every single activity in life. It's very easy to induce brain freeze or brain glue, I often talk about, because the teaching is done in a negative as opposed to a positive way. And then the other pair of words I use all the time, the thing where there must always be a balance, it's the yin and yang really, is between possibilities and realities. I'm often accused of being over-positive, that when I talk about to a rider, well, and looking at them and their horse, that this will be possible. You could really do great things. It's going to be 2 years, it's going to be 3 years, but you really could do great things. This is so exciting. And when I see somebody with real potential, I get really excited about it. But there are other people who say, you mustn't mention that because it can all go wrong. But I say realities, okay, this is what could happen, but now this is the reality. The reality is you're at this level, and everybody starts at a low level. Everybody has to start from somewhere. You're at this level, these are your strengths, these are the things that are not going so well, these are the things we must aim for, these are the little action steps that you must do, which will achieve this goal, which will achieve that goal, which will achieve that goal, and that great aim. Mm-hmm. So you start with realities, and you must be honest about the realities, but the realities always go alongside the possibilities. And suddenly everything becomes absolutely magic.
I like that. Very inspiring. I will say, back to the two words of balancing confidence and competence, the riders that concern me would be the riders whose confidence is much, much higher than their competence. Mm. Those riders do concern me.
It's sending them in, giving them a rousing speech and sending them over the top into war. Carrying an old-fashioned shotgun, etc., etc. It's what happened during these awful world wars that we had. You motivate people, you give them their great confidence, but they just don't have the competence to do what's required. And when that happens across country, when you send somebody out across country, gung ho. A lot of blood, guts and thunder, but you haven't done the background work, you haven't done the progressive training, then that's not good. And that's where good coaching comes in, because a good coach will allow that progressive training to happen. And also, I know you wanted me to talk about it, Hilda, it also comes to this in terms of 3-day eventing and in terms of horse trials where you're doing dressage, cross-country and show jumping. I am absolutely sure that the safest way to do that sport is to work with somebody who understands the 3 disciplines.
The interaction.
That everything you do in the dressage should complement the cross-country and the show jumping work. Everything you do in the cross-country should complement the dressage and show jumping. Everything you do in the show jumping should complement the dressage and the cross-country. And I labour the point, I say it there, but it is absolutely fundamental to safe riding is that you connect the 3 disciplines, but more than that, you do it in a way where simplicity is a key, and that which is so important for a horse. If you go to a lot of different trainers, you get complication. Even if you have 3 people who work along similar lines, it is more difficult to get those 3 people working along similar lines to train you to a level than it is to get one person who understands the basic to take you to a level. You'll be more efficient, in other words, with that one trainer. And then I'll take it from and that applies to the vast majority of riders, because the vast majority of riders are working novice level to intermediate level. Then look at it the other way around. Look at the very highest level. Chris Bartle with the British team has been all-conquering. He has gone back to the Jack Le Goff way. He teaches the dressage, cross-country and show jumping. Mm-hmm. And if Jack Le Goff could be reincarnated now, I bet the American team would grab him like that, mm-hmm. and he would work the 3 disciplines together. But we have a real problem in the horse world because the horse is so amenable. So because the horse is so amenable, we do X, Y, and Z, the horse responds in a particular way. Then we do A, B, and C, the horse responds can be taught to respond in the same way. Two totally different ways of getting to the same end, which you say, well, that's open-minded, that's good. But then when you get different trainers working with different methods with the same horse and the same rider, then they're not complementary. And we say, well, we're doing our dressage, we say, well, this method works, it must be right. It's not necessarily the best way. So I'm always seeking, that's why we have to study our subject at a high level and also a wide level. I'm always seeking ways to train which, given the opportunity, will allow a horse or rider to go to the highest level. I'm always seeking ways to train also that, given the opportunity, would also allow them to go left and right and do long distance riding, change from dressage to show jumping, etc. And I think that's super important. Efficient training is about allowing horses and riders to do all sports. That's what all equestrian sports, that's what good basics should be about. That is why every single coach training structure in the world with lower level coaches insists that you do the three main disciplines. You don't just do one discipline. Later on you can specialize if you want to, but the basics relate to all the disciplines. The basics relate to all different sorts of riders. And yes, it's really difficult to do that, but the more you do it, what you find, you are more simple in what you do. And simplicity is an absolutely golden key. And I can give you an example of that. I do not teach a single lesson without using what I call the 3 Fs. And I did it when I first met you, but I wouldn't have told you about it.
Tell me now, please. You've been holding back.
No. The 3 Fs. Forwards, feel, and fifth leg. Forwards is obvious. You know, unfortunately, a lot of dressage riding used to be very backward. It was holding the horse in. A lot of show jumping riding used to be very backward. It used to be all about control, etc. But you can't do any controlling until you're going forward. First of all, the engine has to go. If you're flying a plane, you might know what every single button does, every single technique, but it's absolutely useless if the engine isn't running smoothly and powering you along. So first of all, you have to have a decent engine. Okay. So first of all, you have to get the horse also thinking forwards.
Yes.
And that may be, with some horses that have had a difficult beginning, quite a long process to develop a situation where the horse wants to do something. But that's when you must make sure you don't overdo the horse, etc., and do things which the horses like to do. You know, I talked about children. You know, you get much more progress with children if you start off doing the things they like to do and then divert them a little left and right if you have to. But forwardness is, you won't find a single I complain about the variety of methods in the horse world, and there's no bigger body of horse books than in the horse world. There are over 3,700 books listed on Amazon at the present time in the horse world. No other sport touches that.
Oh my.
But it's not surprising when things are so complicated. But not a single one of those horse books would disagree that forwardness, ride forward, go forward, and of course the rider to think forwards is the beginning. And then feel, again, that's the word which probably comes into every single book. We all talk about feel. You must have good feel as a rider. It's no good just being able to give aids. You have to be able to feel what's underneath you to be able to do the right thing at the right time. Good feel allows you to do the right thing at the right time. And as you develop your feel, then you also learn about, you can almost think like a horse. You can act like a horse. You can have real empathy. You can understand that. So there are all sorts of levels of feels. To begin with, a novice rider won't know whether they're trotting or cantering, but then very quickly they know what a trot feels like and what a canter feels like. A more advanced rider will be able to feel greater subtlety in everything that's going on, a little of this or a little of that, and greater subtlety about the horse's mind as well. Mm-hmm. So forwards, feel, and I teach something about feel every single lesson, even if it's only to say at the end of a session, how did that feel?
Mm-hmm. Just awareness.
Get them to, and then you keep asking that, and after a little particular, I don't know, a little jump or a little trot in one direction, or first doing lateral work exercise, how did that feel? And then progress is made. And the fifth leg is an umbrella term that relates to so much, but particularly it relates to, at the start, a natural outline and a natural way of going. The term fifth leg, which now more people have picked up on, is to allow your horse to find a fifth leg when you're jumping fences across country or even hunting in Ireland when you're in trouble. So you can close your eyes, drop the reins, and leave it up to the horse. The horse will find, most horses will find a fifth leg, an extra leg to get themselves out of trouble. But the basis of that is that you allow them to use their natural paces and natural outline. You don't hold them with a very tight rein the whole time. You don't override them. You don't dominate them. They have a responsibility to look after you. So when I'm doing a novice lesson on the flat, I will encourage them to have a rein contact, but a rein contact that's harmonious, that goes with the movement of the horse's head and neck. I don't, generally speaking, unless it's to do with safety, I don't use any particular gadgets. Everything is very natural. And from the earliest, it's super important that you develop the natural paces and outline of the horse, which means the trot must be 2 time in the period of suspension, the canter 3 time in the period of suspension, etc., etc. And we develop that to the jumping. The rider has a responsibility to have a wonderful balance, like I showed with you in the book, fantastic balance, so you don't get in the way of the horse. And things have changed so much in the show jumping world that you no longer get people sitting on the back of the saddle and wagoning with the rein as they do their show jumping rounds, as you used to see some continentals. They have gone, if you like, back to what Donahue used to do, which is to sit in a lighter way and to do less and allow the horse to do more. And that makes a huge difference. So there isn't a single session where I don't say to myself in my mind, forwards, feel, and fifth leg.
Thank you for sharing that.
And I use lots of little illustrations, lots of little drawings. Lost my pen now. Thank you. So you can see I have little teardrops here. And I know it's small, a little teardrop here, little teardrop here, teardrop here. And they all fit together there in a circle, just to show how they're all part and parcel of the same thing. You improve any one of feel, forwards, and improve any one of forwards, feel, and fifth leg, you will improve the other 2. So forwardness is obvious. I have an arrow there. The feel, I have a hand over the horse's brain, if you like. Feel comes from the physical and the mental. And the fifth leg, I have a big 5 here. But most of the things that I deal with, which relate directly to maximum result from minimum effort, which relate to all sports, etc., are to do with simplicity. And there's a very good example of simplicity. So in fact, I would say chuck out things that are complicated. And if somebody can't explain what they're doing, if a coach can't explain why they're asking you to do something, then go and find a different coach. It's very easy to say, oh, you will understand over a period of time. But everybody deserves an explanation. Everybody. And you don't have to talk for 20 minutes to explain something, but you have fundamental reasons why you're doing something. And that's why I was always so deeply impressed with Jack Le Goff, that when I first went to America, I went to some lectures that he gave, not expecting anything very special, but I realized straight away how organized his mind was and how simplicity, whether he said it or not, simplicity shone through. And then I asked him a few questions. I asked him a few questions of things I thought I knew the answer to. And again, he had thought this through and he had everything connected. And then what did I find? When I had the opportunity, I went off to watch Bert Donahue work. I was very lucky, and to ask him questions. They came back with the same answers. They came back with the same answers. And those 2, and who invented it, I don't know, but those 2 were the people I picked up on getting the right direction and the right speed, and number 1 and 2. Both said that. And I don't see it as stealing to use that. I see all the time that you can ask questions, which I talked about at the start, which you're so good at. You can ask questions and you can learn and challenge yourself, whether you are a more novice rider or a fellow of the British Horse Society.
Love it, love it. Maybe in conclusion, you'd like to chat a little bit about Jackaroo?
Yes, well, I've been very lucky. Where should I start? If you want to buy a cheaper horse, which when I was trying to find horses for my wife, one of the easiest ways to do that is to buy a mare. Now, I am delighted to say at long last that people are beginning to value mares more, but generally speaking, 20 years ago, mares were, people didn't want mares in the horse trials world. You wouldn't find a single mare in the top 100 dressage horses, but you would find gradually more mares in show jumping, and that's the way it's been over the years. But what do we find? That the Worth, give me a Christian name, Isabel Worth, dressage rider, has 3 fantastic Grand Prix mares. Mm-hmm. She is the leading dressage rider in the world. She has 3 fantastic Grand Prix mares. It was, I can't think exactly how long it was, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I had a conversation with Chris Bartle in France at Pau. And I said about the mares and the dressage, and he said, well, probably it's the way that the horses are trained in dressage, the mares won't put up with it. But since that time, the influence of Carl Hester and Charlotte Dujardin in dressage has meant that people are softer, kinder, there's more harmony in dressage, and I think it's allowed more mares to come through. The number of mares in show jumping is huge. Yes. But the show jumpers have always been more practical. They don't mind what a horse's colour is, what their breeding is, what their sex is, as long as they jump. And in eventing, it's because there are still not many, but there are some mares, and it's certainly the type of training, in fact, that one has to do for horse trials to allow the horse to have their 5th leg, to allow the horse to think for you across country, to allow the horse to be efficient. Mares are highly suitable, no problem at all. But that's why I looked for mares, because they were cheaper for my wife. And as an aside to that, if you buy a horse with a big head, an ugly head, you'll get it even cheaper. But people have this ridiculous perception that a horse with a beautiful head, so-called, is intelligent. But if I look at you and say, God, have you got an intelligent head? Or I'm sitting in a group of people, and I say, right, I'm going to look at everybody now. That person's got an intelligent head. That person hasn't got an intelligent head because their head is huge and they're balding and they're rather ugly. It is ridiculous. Yes. In days of old, they used to look at head shapes and say that would dictate their personality and their intelligence. But it's obviously ridiculous. But it's the same with animals. Just because a horse has got a beautiful head doesn't mean that it's intelligent or unintelligent. There is a range of intelligence within horses, but the head shape doesn't signify that. But we have it in the horse world. So buy a mare that's slightly ugly with an ugly head, get a much cheaper horse. Anyway, I bought 2 mares for Sarah, both of which went to international level, and one of the horses was High Dolly, and High Dolly was 15-3, had 1 point of points, and competed in the very famous La Touche race, which is over 4 miles and a bit at Punchestown, over the banks, the walls, the typical Irish race, if you like, and was in the lead until the final turn, and she got buffeted by other horses either side of her. But anyway, she did not have papers when I bought her, but over a period of time I was able to trace her breeding and prove her breeding, etc. And she was by a horse called Chairlift, a thoroughbred horse, very famous in Irish show jumping, out of a pre-fairy mare. A pre-fairy, and I'm not going to bore you with this, but pre-fairy was by a horse called Precipitation. And why that is interesting, a thoroughbred horse who won the Derby, why that is interesting is that Precipitation is the sire of Furioso, and people think it's a continental horse. Furioso was a thoroughbred horse, and he's you can't talk about show jumping without a mention of Furioso. Anyway, so that's great breeding. So I knew that horse was special. And I also knew there was a horse called Master Imp with wonderful paces, although people thought that he was temperamentally suspect, which is rubbish, because he was the leading event horse sire in the world for 3 years. Was in the lists, despite a small number of horses, was in the top 10 of the British eventing lists for year after year after year. You wouldn't be there unless you did good dressage.
Right.
And you can't do good dressage unless you're settled. Anyway, I put High Dolly together with Master Imp and produced
Jackaroo.
produced Jackaroo, but first of all produced Mandiba.
Okay, right.
And this is Mandiba at the Olympic Games with Karen O'Connor. And what was so special about that is that Karen was an ex-student of mine on a horse that I bred. So that was so exciting.
And he was young, wasn't he?
And unfortunately, he shouldn't have been there. He was only 9. And 2 years later, I bred his full brother, who was High Kingdom. And High Kingdom there at the Olympic Games with Zara Phillips, the Olympic Games in London. But such a huge pleasure just to see those horses go. And with Karen O'Connor, he was only 9 when he went to the Hong Kong, when they had the horse events in Hong Kong.
Right.
Anyway, he was only 9. But he came along the following year. He came to the World Championships, which were in Lexington, and to see Karen go across country on Mandiba, as I said, my ex-student, on a horse that I bred, giving her one of the best cross-country rounds that she's ever had in her life, that made me cry. I even got so excited I hugged David O'Connor, which probably he wasn't expecting at the time. And then there was High Kingdom, who was always knew was super talented, and you would have driven up the avenue of Powers Court today, Hilda, and they used to, the avenue, you can't see it, but it has what they call a ha-ha, so a big dip down at the side, and then like a big ditch,
Right.
so that you wouldn't destroy the view by having a fence. So it's like having a big ditch from the roadway to the field.
I see.
But when I had High Kingdom in that field, there was also a fence here at the top, which doesn't look huge, but the ground level was about 6 foot, therefore below this, plus to have the wide ditch. And I was called one day because High Kingdom has jumped out over this fence.
Oh, my.
The fence was fine, and he was on the green in front of the house. And I took him eventually back to the field, and I put him back in the field, and I was walking to my car, and I heard clip-clop on quite hard ground. It was in the summer, and I turned round, and he trotted to this huge fence and just leaped over it. And I said, this is a very special horse. And then I bred the third one, which was Jackaroo, but he got a leg injury as a young horse, so he's a stallion now. He's just down the road there in the field. You can show him in the field, load him by myself, temperament, fantastic. And they're all related. I mentioned about Chairlift and Furioso. They're all related to these very special horses. One called Kilbaha with John Ledingham, and one called Vivaldi with Nelson Pessoa. And this is a photograph of Kilbaha and Vivaldi at the Hickstead Derby, which I always loved the Derby. And of course, it takes great bravery to do a Derby with the banks and the water and things like that. And my horses are closely related to these horses. There's a real connection which sort of excites me. I like the history of horses. I like special horses, even if they might not be international horses. But I was very lucky to come across High Dolly and then breed these horses. And at the present time, Sam Watson, who's is our leading international horse trials rider, he has a very young Jackaroo, which is not for sale, so that's exciting. And Camilla Spears, who had the very famous little Connemara thoroughbred cross called Portishead Just a Jiff, who just magic. Just tell you briefly about Camilla Spears has a Jackaroo that she thinks a lot of, but Camilla Spears is about to have a child.
Is that horse for sale?
No, that horse is not for sale. But just Camilla Spears went to France for the World Championships. Do you remember where it was recently? Anyway, went to France.
Normandy.
Went to Normandy for the World Championships, but it was a cross-country course that I don't want to see again, to be honest, because the rain came.
Wet, so wet.
So wet, so difficult, so challenging, etc. Portishead Justine was in the junior team with Camilla, and then the young rider team, and then the senior team. He was 15-1, Connemara Thoroughbred Cross. But they had early on a water combination that was really difficult, with a big drop on either what you'd call an incorrect distance or a very difficult distance to an arrowhead in the water. So your big drop to on an angled, 2 very long strides or 3 very short strides. But the ones who were doing it on 2 very long strides were running out, and the ones who did on the 3 strides lost all momentum and found they couldn't get out of they were already tired, couldn't get out of the water, etc. Justine came along, did 1 little trot step in the water, and then he banked the arrowhead.
Oh my gosh.
On top, and kicked off, and he made it just like a little pony club fence. And it's just a reminder that there's always another way. You can look at these things, but that is what fifth leg is about. That is what good training is about. The horse was willing and forwards. The rider had sufficient feel to realize what was going on, but the horse had sufficient fifth leg to say, I can do this, mummy. And he went on and completed so well.
Fabulous.
So those the little horses are special. And people buy horses that are too big. And that's the other way you can buy cheaper horses, buy smaller horses. But we breed horses that are too big and too stupid. And if they're too big, they don't last. So a quarter horse, on a long distance horse, you know the type of horses that do long distance, are the smaller horse. They're the ones that really last. Whether it's Napoleon Charger, or whether it's the most famous thoroughbred horses in the world, which were the Godolphin Barb, the Bridle Turk, and
there's a third one, Godolphin, Turk, and the.
I know this so well.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
This is getting your brain freeze.
Barley Turk, Godolphin
Barb,
and something Arab. Anyway, there's a third one.
The 3 of them. They were 15-1, 15-3 and 16 hands. Hyperion, who won the Derby, he was 15 and was one of the most famous thoroughbred sides of all time. 15-1 when he won the Derby, 15-3 when he stopped growing. Now, of course, there are some bigger horses, and Precipitation was a big horse. The Bridle Turk. Did I mention that?
I think it is a question
it's
of brain
me.
freeze, yes. We'll remember
but
when
they
this
were.
meeting's
So
over.
there's a as we're finished, there's a good thing is we all make mistakes. We all have this little thing that happens sometimes, but it's how you make use of it that's important. So now you have to invite me back again, and I'll remember the third name, and we'll progress from there. But thank you very much, Hilda, for coming and talking to me. I really appreciate it. As you can tell, I enjoy my sport.
It shows, it's obvious, it always has been. We've had a wealth of information, knowledge, guidance, and I will walk away from this yet again, as I always do whenever I interact with William, whether it's a phone call, a meeting in person, an email. The word that comes to mind is you create inspiration. So thank you for that. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you got as much out of this as I did, and wishing everybody a splendid Christmas and lots of great ride IQ sessions throughout the 2022 season. Happy, safe, fun, productive riding.